Welcome back to the Edison Awards Meet the Innovators Forum Earth Day 2021 edition, live from the beautiful Babcock Ranch in Southwest Florida. You know, here in the United States, about 1/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions created by human beings comes from power generation. The only larger segment is transportation. And as transportation moves into electrification, and that tipping point is here right now, all eyes are kind of shifting to the grid and trying to figure out how we make it more renewable. How do we take the carbon out of generating electricity in this country? Well, this town is the first solar-powered town in the United States of America. We're going to meet the man behind it right now. He is Sid Kitson, and the place is called Babcock Ranch. Its first light, and one of the largest solar arrays in the Sunshine State, is starting another 150 megawatt day.
We spent 8 years working to make this happen.
Developer Sid Kitson showed me the crown jewel of his sustainable town that could signal the dawn of a new era in the fight against the climate change crisis.
It's 700,000 panels on about 800 acres of land. So it is a very large solar field. That's more than enough to power our city at full build-out.
It's called Babcock Ranch, the first solar-powered town in the country. So when you look out here, is this our future?
It is the future. It's a piece of the puzzle, and it's a good piece of the puzzle.
The puzzle pieces are falling into place 25 miles north of Fort Myers at what was a huge cattle ranch. Here, Kitson and partners are developing a master plan community of nearly 20,000 homes with a population of 50,000. So far, about 2,300 are here in 900 homes. And it already feels like a town, with a main street, a green with a band shell, shops and offices. Nearly all the amenities are planned. It will all eventually be connected by autonomous electric shuttles. For now, golf carts and electric scooters are the preferred means of mobility.
We want them to stay here, to be comfortable here, to have the shopping, to have the entertainment that they want. I want them to be able to work here and obviously live their lives here.
Kitson has been a developer for more than 35 years. Before that, he was a lineman for the Green Bay Packers and Dallas Cowboys in the 80s. Now he hopes to write a new playbook for developers to go on offense against the climate emergency.
When people hear the word developer, it has a certain connotation that might not necessarily be all that positive. It just makes sense to do it the right way, to live in an environment that is clean and sustainable. That's just good for us health-wise. So if we are also helping in climate change, we're all winning.
The utility that built and operates the solar arrays, Florida Power and Light, agrees. It was one of the company's first big forays into solar power.
It's really our showcase working with Babcock Ranch to highlight all the things that we're doing in one spot.
Matt Valle is FPL's Vice President of Development. Since the installation of these arrays at Babcock Ranch in 2016, the company has gone big on solar power. Statewide, it has installed about 11 million solar panels, generating nearly 9% of what it puts into the grid. The big driver is economics. Solar panels are now 80% cheaper than they were a decade ago.
Every time we make a forecast for what we think solar is going to be in a few years, when we get to that point in time, the actual cost of solar is much lower than we were forecasting. It's the only thing in our generation plan going forward for the next 10 years.
FPL has built 10 megawatts of lithium battery storage here, but it's not nearly enough to power Babcock Ranch through the night. A natural gas plant fills the gap. Grid-level energy storage ideas remain in their infancy, but some Babcock Ranch residents aren't willing to wait for that. They have solar panels on the roof and Tesla battery walls in the garage.
so that at any one time, we're getting electricity either from the batteries, from the roof itself for the solar panels we have up there, or from the grid.
Tom and Lisa Hall have lived here for a year.
I've heard people say, we're living in the city of the future, but we're living here already. Everybody who moves here are really pioneers. People feel a certain sense of they're taking part in a real experiment and they're part of it and they love being part of it.
Sid Kitson's definition of sustainability extends far beyond renewable energy. He has worked hard to ensure Babcock Ranch has sustainable demographics, a mix of incomes and ages. And that's why one of the first things he built was this charter school with a project-based learning curriculum.
I mean, I walk into these rooms and think, man, these guys are going to be world changers. They truly are.
Shannon Treese is the principal. The school filled up almost instantly and has lured many families with school-age kids to Babcock Ranch.
We want to breed that innovation mindset, that growth mindset, that you're never done learning. And if we're going to solve big world problems, you got to have a skill set to do that.
You're growing sustainable humans, essentially, right?
I hope so. That's the goal.
Babcock Ranch is far from an overnight success. Sid Kitson purchased the property in 2006 and has weathered the Great Recession and a pandemic, but he stayed tenaciously focused on the goal line.
We're just getting started. We've been at this just for a few years now, but the sales have been just, exceeding our expectations. It's been fantastic. We have several thousand people living here already, and it's exciting. It just buzzes.
The buzz is attracting attention from all over the world. It's not unlike Menlo Park, New Jersey, in Thomas Edison's heyday. When the great inventor flipped the switch on the electric lights illuminating Christie Street on New Year's Eve 1879, the world saw shining proof a long era of darkness was gone forever. Never a big believer in fossil fuels, Edison would approve of this 21st century update on the revolution he began. It occurs to me you're inventing a new way to build a development.
Absolutely. Babcock Ranch is about innovation. We pride ourselves in that the things that we're doing may be a little bit different, but we want to change the world. And we want to prove that the things that we're doing work. We've been doing things that maybe, seem a little strange at first, but ultimately we think can be incredibly transformational in the future.
The old Babcock Ranch property was 90,000 acres, but his development will sit on only a fifth of it. He sold the rest back to the state to be set aside. And in some cases, he brought the land back to its natural state. This wetland had been drained for agriculture.
You look out here and you look at this beautiful wetland now, knowing that just literally a couple years ago, it was dry, arid, and not good for anything. Now it's flourishing.
A developer who has created some swampland in Florida. Go figure. The land here is 30 feet above sea level. In the state with the most to lose as the climate changes, Babcock Ranch is sitting pretty indeed. And joining me now live to talk about the future of Babcock Ranch, but also the future of power in general, is Sid Kitson, who you saw repeatedly throughout that. Congratulations on all you've accomplished here, Sid. Mario Azar is the president of the global power business at Black & Veatch, which was instrumental in the installation of that fabulous solar array not far away. And from the other side of the state, we have Matt Valle, also featured in that piece, the VP of Development for Florida Power and Light Company. Matt, good to have you with us as well. And Sid, I want to start with you, since all things at Babcock Ranch start with you. I know sustainability for you is kind of a big picture item. It's more holistic than just solar arrays, but solar arrays were an important first start. Was that kind of a linchpin, kind of a foundational moment for you?
There's no question. When my partner and I, Tom Hoban, first started to think about what are those things that are most important, what are those key initiatives, environment certainly was at the very top. But to be truly sustainable, you have to solve that energy problem.
And what a big problem we had. We're looking at building a city of 55,000 people. So when you think about the amount of energy that's going to be consumed, and oh, by the way, we have 6 million square feet of commercial space also. So when we kind of sat back and said, okay, what's the best way? We looked at all different types of renewable energy, but this is the Sunshine State, so it seemed logical that this would be the right place for solar energy. What we didn't realize is that was just the beginning of the story, and we had to work our way through, which we can talk about later about how that was going to happen. But this was always our primary objective.
Okay, so when Sid Kitson approaches you, Matt Valle, or not you necessarily specifically, but Florida Power and Light, what was the reaction? Was FPL already big on board on solar, or was that just emerging?
No, Miles, it was just emerging. When Sid approached us in 2014 or 2015, solar energy was really in only a few spots in the state and not at scale. So what made this work at Babcock Ranch was Sid dedicating the land to enable the solar power to be cheap enough for us to justify putting it on the grid. As Sid alluded to, that was just the beginning of the story, because today we don't need land dedicated to us anymore because solar energy has gotten much cheaper. So what started as one out at Babcock Ranch is today almost 40 solar energy centers around the state and heading to 100 over the next 10 years.
And as you mentioned to me, and as we said in the story, solar is your future at Florida Power and Light.
You know, Miles, it's our future. I am really excited about that future. As you mentioned, it is the Sunshine State. It makes sense that we would be able to harness it here. And I think about the announcements that were made this morning on Earth Day. I mean, someday planet Earth will look like Babcock Ranch. There were major announcements by all countries to curb emissions. And what is emerging around, the world is that solar energy is pulling ahead of all other renewable sources.
So Mario, this is an unusual place, right? There was a lot of land, a lot of sunshine. To make it a solar town, it was practical and doable. When we look at the picture nationwide, is this a practical idea that can be applied elsewhere?
Yeah, so first of all, I do want to commend FPL because I think Matt is being somewhat modest. It's really FPL has been leading the nation in deployment of solar. And we, as an EPC company, we really work with all utilities across the nation. And everybody's trying, in a way, to catch up to net zero. And you're right, there are some more challenging landscapes, but the short answer is solar is possible everywhere. It gets sometimes more difficult if you have some, more complex rocky terrain to install solar. I'm sorry?
Okay, if you need to stop for a sec. Go ahead, Mario.
Yeah, so there are parts of the country where it's more difficult, which makes it a little more expensive if you're dealing with more rocky terrain. So Florida is one of, maybe the easier parts of the country, but there are many, many other parts where you could do solar at large scale, and really every utility is looking at deployment of solar.
So we are encouraging you to make this a conversation. Join us on Slido.com, #MTI. Submit your questions or your comments. We'd love to include you in the conversation. And then toward the end of the program, we'll take some questions from the folks here locally. As we pointed out in the piece, even with all those solar arrays, when the sun isn't shining, you've got a little problem. There's not enough juice to keep all the lights going on here. You have a little bit of storage capability. What's your long-term plan? Would you like to do it without having to use that gas plant that kicks on at night?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad Matt's here so we can hear this, because I've been pitching Florida Power and Light. Maybe we can get a commitment from them here today to enough.
Get them on the hook. All right, Matt, there you go.
I'm gonna put Matt on the spot right now. So here's the thing though. Florida Power and Light are incredible partners, and what they have done from the beginning. It took us 8 years to get this done. And they have been with us every step of the way. We've been working together, and I can't thank them enough for that. And then they stepped up and they said, "Look, let's see how we can work battery storage." So we had the very first solar to battery storage facility. I think it was in the world, but it was 10 megawatts. And I know that they used this sort of as a living laboratory, which is exactly what we wanted along the way. However, the other people have passed us by. And we have an opportunity to turn this city, if you will, almost off the grid if we put enough battery storage in there. And I'm sure Matt wants to spend the hundreds of millions of dollars to make that happen. And seriously, we're very, very hopeful that over time we can increase that battery storage so that, in fact, we don't have to turn to the grid at night. And maybe the grid becomes sort of the backup power if, in fact, something happens, rather than the primary source in the evenings after the batteries have discharged.
So, Matt, that raises an important point. You've got some lithium storage batteries here, but that's not really the ideal application for those types of batteries. I think their discharge rate, they go to about 4 to 6 hours. If you want to have long-term discharges, which you might need, say if a hurricane comes across Florida, I've never heard of that happening, but it could happen potentially. And you want to have batteries that can really give you supply over 10 days, for example. What are the options for doing that to level out that intermittent problem that occurs with renewables?
Sure. Miles, one thing first, just on the battery before turning to kind of how the storage works together. So Sid knows that the battery storage that we put into Babcock at the time was the largest in the United States, the solar plus storage facility. But as he pointed out, it's not enough to run all of Babcock Ranch in the future as it builds out. But it did lead FPL to the construction of the Manatee Energy Storage Center, which is going to be the largest storage plus solar facility in the world when it goes in at the end of this year. Now, I know that's a little bit north of Sid, and it doesn't fully count for Babcock Ranch, but that's an important point about what we did at Babcock and what it's led to elsewhere in our grid. And then, Miles, to your point on longer term, you're right. Battery storage plays a role, at least as we see right now, in shorter duration storage. So 4 hours, maybe up to 6 hours. And that works on a day-to-day basis if it's sunny in the day and it's dark at night. But what happens if you have several days of rain in a row and you can't recharge those batteries? And there you need a different ingredient to get to zero carbon. And we and many in the industry think that ingredient is green hydrogen. And the way green hydrogen is produced is with excess solar energy, we would take that, split water, capture the hydrogen, and then be able to use that hydrogen as longer duration storage when needed to burn it in our power plants today that burn natural gas.
So we have a question from Slido. What other forms of clean energy is FPL and BV investing in? Mario?
Yeah, I think Matt said it. Hydrogen is another source. We're working on developing more green hydrogen applications.
It might be worth explaining what green hydrogen is to people. That's kind of a newish term. It's hydrogen that's produced from green sources, right?
Right. That's what green hydrogen is. And what Matt was alluding to essentially is a process called electrolysis, where you're splitting H2O basically and getting your hydrogen.
And I think the one key point here is that you can actually feed that hydrogen into an existing fossil fuel plant and run it on the hydrogen.
That is an extremely important point. Not all fossil plants, but gas-fired plants. And the turbines have to be equipped to burn hydrogen, which most newer technology gas turbines are coming really pre-equipped. You just have to change your nozzles and burners, and you're able to fire the same turbine on green hydrogen and have an emissions-free, what we call in the industry, base-loaded source, which is really not relying on sun shining or for wind blowing.
Okay, so I did interrupt you there. We were talking about the other renewables that you're involved in. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, so green hydrogen is another one that is not renewable, but zero carbon, not very popular, is nuclear. So nuclear, there are facilities that have been really strengthened and reinforced, and there's new technologies being developed with much smaller reactors that could generate power and have much less risk. So that's another technology. And of course, you're well aware of wind. Wind is a great source of clean energy, and there's an offshore element to it, but we're running out of land to put these big, noisy turbines, so they're going offshore. Europe has been doing that for a long time, so they're leading really the globe in offshore wind in the North Sea and other parts of Europe, and now offshore wind is moving to the US as a very credible source of clean energy.
All right, so we're getting into about the last 10 minutes of this session, so if there are any audience questions, make your way up to the microphone and I'll make sure to include them. Matt, I've got to ask you about nuclear, since you are a Naval Academy graduate and nuclear submariner, or submariner, whichever you prefer. You've spent a lot of time in close proximity to nuclear reactors, and yet, nuclear is not really on the agenda for Florida Power and Light. Is it just a matter of expense?
Yeah, I thought, Miles, when you paused in on yet, you were going to say, and you turned out okay, Matt, but you're right. I have spent many nights sleeping close to nuclear reactors, and I'm okay. It's safe technology. It's operated all over the country today. I think the challenge is new nuclear, at least as we have conceived it, in the past. And there's only one that's gotten close to finish, the one that's being developed in Georgia, and it's quite expensive. Does it play a role? I think existing nuclear, for example, at Florida Power and Light, is 20% of all of our energy at FPL is from nuclear, and that's carbon-free, and that's been in the ground for many decades and operated safely. So it certainly plays a role. I think time will tell if modular nuclear or other sources will make a lot of sense on the grid. That's not something that FPL has gotten into. But we're certainly watching that with keen interest. All
right, question from the audience. Sean.
Hi, so seeing the innovation and model set by Babcock Ranch is fantastic. It's been brilliant to see. I work in the sustainable fuels and chemical space, and as we in our field look forward, we see green hydrogen as the path to truly sustainable fuels and chemicals that can use CO2 directly. For that, we need monstrous amounts of power, not simply an amount of power that replaces today's grid, but actually power that replaces today's fuel and chemicals industry. What has to change in your collective view to bring about that degree of sustainable power deployment?
That's a great question. Mario, you want to start with that?
Look, you're raising a real challenge. So, to have green hydrogen, you need power to start with, right? So, look, the answer is a combination of all other sources that will get you there. So it's not just one source. It's not just solar. It's not just wind. Maybe nuclear. Don't forget hydro. We didn't talk about hydro. Hydro is pretty ancient technology, and it's clean energy, and it generates pretty large, capacity. So you really got to connect multiple sources and be able to tap into them. It's not just one source that's the answer.
Matt, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, because when I was talking about green hydrogen earlier, I was talking about the utility industry, right, serving electricity. But what also is going on is the decarbonization of other industries. So most of the transportation sector is going to electrify, and that's an incremental load for the utility sector to supply. But as the person who asked the question alluded to, the industrial sector that burns molecular fuels for heating and other chemical processes, as that sector starts to decarbonize, you're going to need to produce things like green hydrogen or green ammonia to take out the carbon. And one thing I will say is we have seen some early instances of that, nothing that's been commercial at scale, but it is staggering the size of those facilities. For example, it's like another new city popped up in our service territory that we need to serve to produce that amount of energy.
Wow, that puts it in perspective. Go ahead, Sid.
I do think that I want to retract my earlier statement of more batteries, and I would rather have green hydrogen, so let's get to work over here at Babcock Ranch.
You got to stay in the leading edge, Sid.
Exactly.
All right, another question from the audience here.
Yeah, Chris Lopez, Tico Peoples Gas. What's the future of natural gas in power generation? Is it a placeholder until solar can take over green hydrogen, or is it here to stay for the long term?
Mario, you want to go first? I heard Matt want to do that.
I think it's probably a better question
Matt,
for
what do you think? I mean, natural gas.
My view on
listen, natural gas is better than coal, but it still is a big carbon emitter.
I agree, Miles. I don't think it goes away. I think predominantly we are being run in the future 10, 20, 30 years from now on carbon-free, but you'd be glad to have it as a backup power source if you needed it. And there are probably still some applications where it makes a lot of sense, right? I think what we're all focused on is taking the majority of the carbon outs, even though carbon goals are set at 0 carbon. You know, we don't burn oil to generate electricity, but we have it at FPL as a backup fuel just in case we had a problem.
Yeah, I would maybe add one thing. Part of the equation also, it's, Matt said it, it's carbon, you know, you want to get to net zero. And part of it also is taking carbon out of the system. So there's a lot of work on technology called direct air carbon capture. And that will also offset some of your carbon fuels that are still going to have a role. The goal really is to keep reducing the role of fossil fuels. And you know, I think we can get to a point where you don't need them, but I agree with Matt. It's going to take some time.
One more question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Anais Marisarnelli from Dunbar High School. I'm a junior there.
Boy, Dunbar High School has some really smart people. Bring it on, Dunbar. Yeah, liking this.
Are there any concerns over possible harmful effects of solar panels or solar energy in general? So like when panels go into landfills and like the materials that go into making them, or like possible warming of the atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the overall carbon cycle and you consider what it takes to get you that panel, and we really don't know how to recycle that, that's a problem, isn't it, Mario?
Yeah, recycling is a problem. The process of making the panels and where they're coming from. Today, a lot of the panels come from China, and we know China relies very heavily on coal for their power generation. So it's not, you're asking a really good question. It's not perfect yet. In terms of recycling and disposal, I'm pretty confident that the industry will find a way to safely dispose of old panels and limit harm to the environment. I think, you know, the bigger question is making them, transporting them, right? I mean, all that still is relying somewhat on fossil. So it's not perfect, but we're getting there.
All right, final question. This one is from Sid, from Andreas Winter. Hello from Sweden. Fantastic project. I want to buy a house.
First of all, thank you, Mom, for sending that. I really appreciate it. And I would say we have a house for you. Come on down.
Come on down. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate that very informative discussion. Great job. The future of power. All right, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to hear from our 2 Edison Achievement Award winners, and one of whom is, it's a perfect segue. We've set her up perfectly because she wants to take the carbon coming out of those smokestacks and turn it into fuel. And that's, in fact, what they're doing right now. And then a little bit later, we're going to hear from a gentleman who wants us to live longer lives in a healthier fashion. So you got to stay tuned for that, right? So the Edison Awards Meet the Innovators Forum continues. Stay with us. We're going to take a 5-minute break.